What Drives You is brought to you by Ziglar, your premier source for equipping life and leadership coaches. Visit Ziglar.com and let them inspire your true coaching performance.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kevin Miller. This is the What Drives You podcast, where we focus on your drive. Your drive is working in some areas of your life, producing great success, yet in other areas, maybe not so much. Let's get clarity on what you value, what motives are helping and hurting you, and get you fully into alignment so you're driving further and faster and enjoying the ride. How to harness nature through science to free your mind and take action. Most of us think we're driving through our lives with automatic shifting, like almost all our cars are nowadays. In truth, our life is more like a stick shift. We've got to manually shift gears, and most of us habitually live in, first to second to maybe third gear. And we go about living in our minds with a lot of limitations and blind spots and ignorance. So I bring you Jeff Karp. Jeff started life with some big struggles. Amidst some undiagnosed issues, he did so poorly in school they wanted to hold him back in second grade. Teachers literally put these walls up like blinders on him in class with timers on him and embarrassed him for not paying attention and staying on task. He was labeled a troublemaker. But at age 8, a teacher asked him about how he was thinking. And it opened up a whole new world for Jeff, so much so that he cited it as really his first spiritual experience. You'll hear him talk about that at the top of the show. Well, he went on to adjust how he learned and to think about what he's thinking or how he's thinking. And today, he's a member of the National Academy of Inventors. He's literally invented a bunch of stuff. He's got zillions of patents, and he's a professor at Harvard Medical School and MIT, and a distinguished chair at Brigham and Women's Hospital. So, Dr. Karp, Jeff, he's dedicated his research laboratory to bio-inspired medical problem solving, which he explains what that is at the top of the show. I asked him to define it. It's really studying the phenomenon of nature and replicating it through science. So his lab's technologies include things like a nasal spray to neutralize pathogens, a tissue glue that can seal holes inside a beating heart, targeted therapy for osteoarthritis and inflammatory bowel disease, needles that automatically stop when they reach their target, and more. His new book, however, is focused on you and me and our brains and the vast untapped potential, he says, that we can ignite with the right tools. So the book he has now authored is called LIT, L-I-T, which stands for Life Ignition Tools. Use nature's playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. Some would call it brain hacks, but it's really not. It's just the brain's ability that we're generally aware of. And like I started at the beginning here, I think it helps us to shift gears and shift into fourth gear and fifth gear and sixth gear. And as I talk about with drive, we want to drive further and faster, but with less effort. So join me in this conversation to learn more about how we can utilize some of the tools to get our brain, lit. Jeff, when I first saw the title of your book, I was interested. And then when I saw Bioinsperationalist, I actually had to go look that up and thought, okay, I can kind of, contextually figure out what that is, but Bioinsperationalist, I had to look it up. And hey, first off, man, thanks for being here. I'm eager to talk about this.
Let's do it.
So I looked it up, defined as devising strategies different from that employed by nature to achieve the same function and properties. Okay, so that's the definition. That's, number one, Google pops up. You tell me how you define bio-inspiration or yourself as a bio-inspirationalist.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for engaging and having me on your show. I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you when it all started for me. So I was doing my postdoctoral work. So after I got my PhD in Toronto, I got into a lab at MIT. Actually, initially was told no that when I applied to this lab, but I found a way to get in. One night I was kind of working late, doing my research thing. and I notice a journal article like opened on someone's desk. And normally, my eyes are just kind of wandering, but this one kind of drew me in because there was literally a Spider-Man action figure stuck to the ceiling in this journal article. And I saw like it was like a Nature journal, which is one of the most prestigious journals. So that kind of caught my attention. And I went back to my desk and kind of typed in a bunch of keywords and things. And I found this article. And what the researchers had done is they had figured out how geckos are able to walk up walls and hang from a single toe. It's not suction cups. It's not glue. Nothing that you typically would think of. It's like this hierarchical design. So it's like these hairs, and then at higher magnification go to even smaller hairs, and then even higher magnification, you get to these hairs that are like 100 nanometers, which is like 1,000 times smaller than a human hair. And what it does is it maximizes the surface area of interaction. So normally if you put two surfaces together, there's really not that much that's like contacting, not because there's like little irregularities and things like
Yeah.
that. But when you get maximal surface area contact, there actually the forces between them become important. And that's how the gecko is able to hang from a single toe. And what these researchers did is they then created this molding technique, nano molding actually, where they could get this hierarchical design with these different length scales of hairs. And they were able to take like a plastic kind of material, a polymer material. And just like you kind of bake a cake, they made a mold with these various holes and they put the material in, they took it out, and they showed they could actually get the same kind of level
Wow.
of adhesion of the gecko by mimicking its,
Wow.
its design, its adhesive design. And so that got me really excited. And at the time, I was working in a laboratory that was focused on medical solutions.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't really help myself but think about, okay, how might we apply this in medicine? And I had also been sort of asking around, like talking to a lot of doctors, and there's this need for better surgical adhesive. So, we have sutures like stitches, we have staples, but sometimes you can't really use them because if it's inside the body, it's hard to put like a stapler inside the body. And sometimes with stitches, you need like 100 and it can take a long time. And then the patient's on the operating room table for a long period of time. And so I started thinking, well, what if we could create a tape that had similar properties to what this group had done, but instead of
Yeah.
working under dry conditions, it would work inside the body and it would be fully degradable and it would be elastic because, the body, there's like,
Mhm.
a lot of movement and things. And so that's what we did. We actually created, based on sort of seeing this example, we created a tape that could adhere to surfaces, was elastic, it could stretch back over and over, and then it could be, it was biodegradable. And that was really my entry point into the area of bioinspiration. And one more thing I'll say about it, which I find is just super critical, is that what I've noticed in academia, like academic research, universities and colleges and things, is that it's so easy to become incremental in the work that we do. It's so easy to just kind of do the next little thing and, publish the paper and make that the goal. And what I realize is I'm most interested in truly developing solutions that can be brought to patients in a short period of time. And I needed to kind of intercept this sort of incremental thinking. I need to figure out a way so that we can think bigger, that we can keep the North Star on moving the needle for patients.
Right.
And turning to nature for me is one of those ways that we intercept those routine patterns to bring in the fresh energy, to bring in new ideas, to really help us overcome hurdles because solving medical problems is so challenging.
Man, thank you. That's fascinating on the geckos. It's interesting. I mean, you mentioned academia, and at face value, that's how I saw you, Jeff. I saw, academic, scientist, the fancy degrees and whatnot, which would normally be a little bit out of my comfort zone. And then yet the book is kind of, as you attested to a second ago, you're not interested just in theoretical concepts, but you want application, really life application. And I look at the book as a self-improvement book. And even to that point, not to put this on you, but I'm looking at it and I'm going, gosh, there's a lot of spiritual tenets in here to me, from nature to the applications. And I thought that doesn't usually come into academia and science so much for the most part. And yet I got to admit, man, I took a great feel of a spiritual application from what you wrote. How's that set?
Well, I had my first spiritual experience actually happened in the second grade. And that's where everything, what I do today really comes from that.
Okay.
Um,
Tell me.
yeah, what happened was, so in the second grade, I was struggling. And I don't, I feel like in my life, sure, there's been some struggles here and there compared to other struggles I've seen people had, like, mine are small, but early on I was struggling, and then I think it turned into a challenge for me because I had undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences. And, I just couldn't, I couldn't make sense of the world. I wasn't connecting with anybody. My mom tried flashcards. She tried phonics. I just couldn't. I'd sit at the back of the class, frustrated, felt like an alien. And at the end of the year, the teacher, Mr. Steadwell, second grade teacher, pulled my parents aside and said, I'd like to hold Jeff back a year to repeat the second grade. And my parents negotiated with the teacher and said, okay, if Jeff goes spends time with tutors over the summer to catch up, can he go to the third grade? And there was an agreement made. So all my classmates went on vacation, and here I am in
Yeah.
summer school. And so, I would go in and, what happened, actually, there was one specific day, actually, that I want to tell you about, where I went in and the tutor read a passage and asked me some questions, and I gave answers pretty quickly. Never really sure about what I was saying, but I just gave the answers, and because that was kind of what we were doing. And then, but this one day, she paused and she looked me in the eye and she said, "How did you think about that?"
Yeah.
And that was the transformative moment. That moment was really, as I look back, it was almost like my first step into the spiritual world, in the sense of, I turned inward. I had been very outward facing person, very impulsive, just said what was ever on my mind, acted whatever, I was in the second grade, right? 7 years old. But that was a transformative experience because it was almost like this portal open, this canvas through which I could think about my own thinking, through which I could have this awareness of my own thoughts. I could start noticing patterns of what I said and how people reacted to what I said. Or I noticed my certain reactions I would have based on what other people said to me. Like, I was starting to really tune into that. And I'll give you an example. What I noticed was, here I am, this ADHD, fairly extreme, distracted kid. My teachers would put blinders on my desk,
Yeah.
and other kids would make fun of me. They'd put a stopwatch there because I had a lot of trouble with time. They'd call me lazy and not going to amount to much. And I was always going to I became kind of a troublemaker, really. But what happened was, I started to notice that whenever I asked a question, there was these few moments afterwards where I could hyper focus on what was being said to me. And that would imprint in my mind, and I'd be able to recall it. I'd be able to build on whatever someone said after I asked a question. I'd be able to kind of connect dots in my mind. And I realized that was the way I needed to learn. I learned by asking questions. And that opened up so many doors for me. But it also, I had to put a lot of work in because there's only so many questions you can ask in a class. So the strategy that worked for me is I would just ask teachers to spend time after school. I went in, even on high school, we go in almost every weekend to get caught up, with the teachers who actually went in on the weekend. There was a couple. That became a key strategy. So everything really came from that, this sort of like turning inward moment when I was 7 years old.
So let me ask a question there. And it's been an area I, for years, have said, I don't know what of my dysfunctions I've actually overcome call them, dysfunctions, but struggles amongst the norm or whatever, maybe learn a little different or understand things a little different or whatever. I don't know how much of those I have overcome, but I have figured out ways to manage them, is what I've said. But I'm thinking in regards, and I wanted to go a little bit into your story in regards to that. As you went on, obviously you went from, embarrassed, learning disabled, they want to hold you back. And, you're at Harvard and MIT, and there's a great story, and we'll get into that a little bit. But in that, how much, you see how to say this? I don't know if I'm asking a percentage, but just conceptually, how much of your ultimate success came from, one, you learning how to understand and comprehend within the structure, okay, over here of school, of work, of whatever. How much came from that, you learning how to manage yourself in essence, and how much from you also figuring out what environments you can better function in? Because I asked that because I want to say I learned how to manage my dysfunctions. Well, I also created a life that allows me to kind of run within I've always been self-employed. There's a reason for that. I've always, had to be autonomous with my creativity. Well, there's a reason for that. I have struggles here and there. So, well, there you go. I'll throw that at you. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Oh, well, a few things jump to mind.
Yeah,
So, and I want to throw in one other element, which
please.
is I had incredible support from my mom during this
Okay.
time. Like I was a C&D student essentially until the 7th grade when I got identified as having learning differences. And actually, my mom, the school refused to do anything about it. They didn't have resources. They didn't understand it. My mom put this massive file together, actually went to the school board alone and fought for me to be identified, which actually worked. And then my grades went from like C's and D's to A's. So I think, part of it as well, the story, I just want to make sure that, I get this out there, is that, my mom was really my biggest champion. She was kind of in the background telling me not to believe the labels that the teachers were giving me. And then also she would almost like, tell me I had superhero powers, and I didn't really tune into it, but I started to believe it because I heard it so many times. Right. And
no, I appreciate that. Let me reframe it then, because I
yeah.
really am thinking, as I was reading your story, I'm thinking about the people out there with kids who are having struggles in the norm of the environment. So if I restated it now with what you said, how much did you learn to bend around the system? How much help, as you're testing to right there, did you get from great people who helped bend around you somewhat? And then as you've gone on, how much have you also then figured out an environment, in essence, a modality that better fit who and how you are? Okay, I'll put it back to you.
Okay. So I would say, well, first of all, that I did have a pretty deep sense that I existed in a system that was a mismatch for whatever
Yeah.
so the way my brain worked. It felt like a complete mismatch.
You're like on the island of misfit toys.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like to the point where when I had this experience in the 2nd grade about thinking, it put me on a path where, so for example, like the Lit Tools, this book that I've written, the tools didn't come out of my laboratory. They came out of the laboratory of my life. And it was all came back to the struggles that I went through early on, which then it was almost like my whole life I've been trying trying things to figure out, like watching other people's patterns, essentially trying them myself, mimicking other things that people did to try to feel like, does this help me, or do I feel weird? Does this not suit me? And that's been my whole life. It's been all about experimentation, what to say in what situations, so I feel like a big part of it was shaping, like almost like in one way, kind of looking back, it is that was almost like I had this hardware, right? Like, let's say, like, think
Yeah.
of the kind of the computer analogy. I had this hardware, which I kind of was starting to kind of figure out. And I had my mom telling me like, hey, you got this sophisticated hardware, and then I was like, but I felt like I had no software, and I had to program the software on my own. I had to figure out what worked for me, what didn't work for me. And like I would sit through class, even not just in elementary school and high school, but even in undergrad, everything would be beyond me. I couldn't keep up. I stopped going to classes when I was in college because I'd just be too frustrated. It went too fast. I couldn't keep up. I had a lot of questions. And so I would just find a way to learn on my own, and I'll just give you one sense of that. One of the ways, just through experimentation, that I found that I could learn and was, let's say, if it was some sort of math problem or whatever, I would look at the solution and I would study the solution to figure out what was the question being asked. So
Interesting.
instead of going forward, I would go backwards. And for some reason, that just clicked for me, like when I looked at the solution. And then because that would almost motivate me to be like, okay, I don't understand this part. Then I go to the textbook to figure out what is this part of the solution. So I'm like, it's like problem-based learning. Like I don't understand X. I need to understand X, go figure out X, then come back to it. And so that helped me. And that's what I did through my entire college. I would just figure things out by studying solutions to figure out the question. And then once I did that, I could go forward, through the problems.
That's interesting. I've got a bunch of kids, and I've had different variations, and some with some issues, some not. And you could look at this and go, "Oh my gosh!" With those kind of issues, academia is not your path. Which I struggled. I won't go into my story, but I struggled a lot in school. Not the exact same as you, but man, some similarities. I didn't know what the heck they're talking about. I really had a hard time with auditory processing and was interested in, well, gosh, but we have similar, and I look at your book and go, very similar interests. I mean, this is what I do. Look at the books behind me, these books. And I did not go the academic route. I got out of school as quick as I could and became a pro athlete and went that way and came back around here. But it's so interesting to see that you persevered along this, the troubles that you had, being held back or wanting to hold you back and being, learning disabled, whatever, being embarrassed by teachers. You still stayed the course. You still saw a desire for academia, science, and some of those understandings, and obviously have gone on to great success.
I can tell
But
you why, by the way, because I think you're getting at a really important thing that I'm
please,
sort of like resonating with as I'm sort of reflecting in the moment. And I think the reason I was able to persist and keep going is um, because it was like exciting to be a detective, to figure these things out, And I feel when you put yourself in this kind of detective mode and you start finding pieces and you start like uncovering the puzzle of how your mind operates and what serves you best, it's like my mind was flooded with these positive neurotransmitters. I'm sure it was like dopamine and serotonin and all the usual suspects, right? Like endorphins and things like that. Like it's kind of like when I think, just one example, I think of like the physics that I took in high school and how I never got it right the first time or the 10th time. But I realized if I kept at it, maybe like the 15th time or the 16th or 17th, I'd figure it out. And when I figured it out, it felt amazing. Like it was like this jolt of just, on top of the world. And so I feel like it was almost like it was by being able to tap into that, that's what kept me going, was that when I started figuring out these pieces. And I feel that's what also drives me a lot today in my laboratory. Like we have no specific disease focus in my lab and no specific technology focus. We're constantly getting into new areas, which means we have to bring some level of vulnerability to the work, actually a lot of vulnerability. But it also means I'm constantly learning. I have to, in order to survive kind of the route that I want to take. But that's exhilarating. Like that's so, because there's it's like just these constant pings of progress amidst the challenges of moving forward. But like if you can tap into those little pings of like you're on the right path or you figure something out and you kind of lock it in, I feel like you can tap into that to propel you forward in incredible ways.
I hear you. It strikes me, and you talk about this in the book, curiosity. It's one of my favorite words. If I could give a gift to everyone, to my kids, I want them to figure out, what is it that you are just innately curious about? I mean, I've got a kid right now who's so curious about aspects of finance. Didn't get that from me. Didn't get that from any exposure in our home. And somewhere along the line, he got it. And so I'm going to connect him with a buddy who's, that's his world. But the curiosity, because I heard you talk about that. You had a lot of curiosity in that, and you would hear a question or a test question, and here's the answer. And you're thinking, that's like the tip of the iceberg. That's like a finite part of so much. You had so much curiosity, which is interesting as I think about it, Jeff, that I had a family that was involved in personal development. That's where my curiosity was. So I got my curiosity at home with the next personality profile or the next, self-improvement book, and it was happening there. But you did find it again in these aspects of academia and science and whatnot, and fixing things. And I feel like I read the word curiosity in your book quite a bit. It feels like that's what kept you on the path. Fair?
I think that's totally fair. I mean, I think the other part of the picture that's important to paint is that, like, I couldn't figure out really, I mean, there's so many things I couldn't figure out. I wanted to build a robot, for example. When I was a kid, I would just throw paper towel rolls and things in my closet. And one day I was like, okay, I'm going to put it together. I had no idea what I was doing, and nothing happened, like I had a microscope at one point. I love looking down it, but and a chemistry set, but I had no idea what I was doing. Like I didn't make any progress. I wasn't one of these kids who just got it, and could just mix things together and come up with incredible things. I would just mix things together and nothing would happen. Like that was kind of where I was at. But at the same time, I think there were many circumstances that presented themselves where I was able to sort of cultivate that curiosity. So I'll give you an example. My dad, we moved out to the country when I was in the third grade. And country, I mean, really the country, sheep farm beside us, buffalo farm across the road, farmer's field in the backyard. I wake up in the middle of the night, there'd be a pack of wolves on the front lawn. We had foxes and owls, and there was a creek that ran. My driveway was like 1,000 feet long, carved through a forest. There was like a creek that ran through it. We get snapping turtles and crayfish and leeches, and it was the whole thing. And so, to me, I feel like being in that environment and every day getting off the bus and walking along this driveway that's like through the forest, that really, I think, was part of it, because I would just, there were no phones back then or anything, right? So I would just walk home and just look at the texture of the bark on the trees, and I'd look at the leaves, and things would be changing, right? Things are constantly changing when you are in nature. And that's actually something recently I've been having this thought that, like, if you look around, for example, the walls of where you are, like right now, you look around the ceiling, the walls, and I'm like, wait a moment, they're not changing. Like, I mean, they're going to change super, super slow. But like, if you go to nature, things change dramatically each day. Like plants are, kind of always, as the sun moves through the sky, the plants are angling themselves differently. Yeah. But in our houses, in our offices, in our cars, like the changes are not happening. Like, we can't perceive any changes, but when we're outside, things are always changing. So as I'm walking through my driveway every day, it's a little different, right? And I might not consciously process that, but I'm pretty sure subconsciously, you kind of are noticing these things. And I think that taps into curiosity. And actually, just one more thing on curiosity is that it's something that people can practice as a skill. And to me, the root of getting better at tapping into your curiosity is questions. And I'll give one example of how in grad school, I found a way to, here I am, my whole life has been about questions, because I knew questions were key to learning. But when I got into grad school, I had a situation where I was about to encounter a whole new level of questioning. And so what happened was, I got into University of Toronto, and there'd be these seminar speakers. And I'd go to the seminar speaker, and they'd give their talk. And at the end of the talk, there's the question and answer period. And then the arrows start flying, right? Like a scientific, when you're in like a scientific community, like these are real. I mean, these are like almost like crossbow kind of arrows, right? And it would just like boom right to the heart of the of what the speaker spoke about. You know, every question was just so incredible. These arrows are just flying constantly. And here I am thinking, I have no arrows. Like, I don't have any questions. These questions are not coming to my mind. Why? I couldn't figure it out. Like, what's wrong with me? You know, like, that's how I was kind of like, why am I not thinking of these questions? They're incredible questions. They seem so important. And so whenever I encounter something I'm not good at or I can't do, I quickly move to, okay, the reason is because I haven't engaged a process that works for me. And so I started to think, okay, what could be a process here? And I used to play chess with my dad when I was younger. And what defines an amateur chess player from an expert chess player is pattern recognition. You know, the expert chess players can see 12, 13, 14 moves ahead. And so I started thinking, okay, what can I notice patterns? So the next seminar I go to, everybody in the room is focused on what the seminar speaker is talking about, but I'm focused on something completely different. I'm focused on the questions that people are asking at the end of the session. And I started writing them down. I wrote down all the questions for like a number of weeks. And then one day I looked at the questions and I was just kind of flipping through and I was like, holy there's patterns to these questions. Like, there was categories. There was literally like 4 or 5 categories of these questions. So some people would ask, is the experiment working? Like, did they set it up? When you set up an experiment, like, a lot of things can go wrong. It can be very complicated. So they were asking questions, was the experiment set up properly? Another question would be, are the results actually important? So like, are these like, maybe if they're developing a blood diagnostic and they did all the work in salt solution and they didn't do something complicated like blood and they got amazing results, then it might not be important yet. They haven't done the most important experiment, which is to show that it works in blood, not just salt solution. There were questions around statistics and there were, so there were all these, and sometimes people overstate their conclusions, right? So there were questions around like, did the results support what they were saying? So all of a sudden, when I went into the next seminar, I was like in detective mode. I was like, my curiosity was freaking stoked, right? Because I go in and I'm looking for holes in what the presenter is talking about, right? I'm listening for like, okay, do they have the right experimental setup? Are the results important? Are they overstating their conclusions? Are their statistics right? And I'm like taking notes. I'm like, everything they're saying now, because I'm paying more attention, because I'm curious about this, it's sinking into my mind more. I'm starting to connect with information I already have. I'm now coming up with ideas for what they could do next. So these questions are not only sort of helping me tap into curiosity, but they're helping me tap into creativity as well, right? Mm-hmm. And I've now upped my game in these questions. I'm thinking of the same questions as everyone else because I know the motivation behind why people were asking those questions. And so I realize questions are a skill and that I can just keep getting better and better at it throughout life.
Well, I love it. And I'm back to, I want people to hear the thread of curiosity and honoring your curiosity. I mean, so much when you talk about it, 8 years old, you had this realization of, the input of thinking about what you're thinking about. I mean, it's self-awareness, which so many, as you know, so many of us never come to, or if we do, we still struggle with it, but we come back to that. You had some self-awareness and to think about what you're thinking about, or think about how you were thinking. And if we would all look at that and go, oh my gosh, what are our propensities? What are our filters? What are our predispositions? Why do we think, and honor that? Not just think, man, I'm weird or whatever, but to sit back and go, why do you think that? Part of the reason I sit here, Jeff, is I would go to these seminars with my parents, and hear these speakers, and I go, man, and after you hear so many of them, I get what you're saying. And I also hear where people are going to discount this. I want to speak to that because it's good information, but I know that people are going to discount it. Let's get in there. And I had the opportunity to be aware of what I'm thinking about and sort of bring people back to that, because you talked about a superpower. Man, when I look at you and look at your story and look at the concept of LIT, life ignition tools, and so much of it is about being intentional. I feel like your superpower, granted, you're at, Harvard and MIT and creating patents and inventions and whatever. We could say, oh, he's a genius, or, the IQ and he's brilliant, whatever. Okay, sure. But there's a lot of people who have that, and it's never come to any use or value to anyone at all. The superpower feels like, to me, it is that thinking about what you're thinking about, that awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's one of these things that everybody can tap into. It's within
Mm-hmm.
all of us. And when I hear like the word, let's say like awareness and things, I think for years I've also been, clearly I've at a young age I sort of had this entry point into awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's always higher levels of awareness we can get to, and when people talk about awareness, the challenge I have is that there's no process associated with it, right? So if like, let's say someone says like, okay, you just need to have more awareness about it, which people have said to me before about various things. And I think to myself, okay, but what's the process to get there, right? Because if I can figure out the process, then I can start moving towards awareness. If I don't
Right.
have a process, like it could be a great goal, be like, yeah, I want to have more awareness. But if I don't have a path to get there, that works for me, I'm never going to get there. And to me, part of that path that I think anybody can tap into is, these types of things where we may have, like, it's almost like, let's say, when you're leading with curiosity, your brain lights up. Like you get this sort of like infusion of energy. So it's sort of like, to me, it's so I would like in the context of curiosity, I would define it as awareness is when you're doing something in your day and you feel a burst of energy because of what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can recognize that burst of energy because you're doing something that interests you, then that's the awareness. That's what you want to tap into. So it's more about like noticing this sort of visceral, could be in your mind, could be in your body, could be both, but like some sort of like infusion of energy. And by the same note, like I've also noticed that sometimes things go the opposite direction, and that,
That's what I was going to ask
you
next.
know,
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
yeah. And so there's certain things that I might do during the day where I'm like, this doesn't really energize me. In fact, it sort of is sucking the energy out of me.
Yes.
It's putting me into like maybe more of like a negative state. And so I start to think to myself, okay, there's certain aspects of like paperwork or monotonous things that I need to do, right? And so it's sort of like, to me, then I think about it from this perspective. I say, okay, is there a way I can frame this in my mind? Is there a framing? Is there a a sort of perspective that I can take on it to say, I need to do, like, I know if I get to Y, like, I'm going to feel great at Y, but X, I'm not going to feel that great. But it's sort of like, I'm going to do X now because I know Y is coming next. Like, I know so then it's sort of like, I just need to kind of trick myself in various ways to get done the thing before so I can get to, I mean, it's one of these things where there's a lot of mind games that I play, right? A lot of things in order to, like, I'll give you an example. Like in when I was at McGill University in my undergrad, it was really hard for me to study for multiple hours at a time. It was really hard, and I had to do it in order to, to do well on my exams. And so I would set up these little games for me where it would be, I love Wendy's, right? Going to Wendy's and having a hamburger at Wendy's. And I was like, okay, I'm going to reward myself with going to Wendy's if I can work for another hour and a half, like I was just like, so like all these little games, right, that I would play. But what would happen is there's other things that kind of emerge. So once I get to that hour and a half, it's like I feel, not only am I rewarding myself, but I feel good because I was like, wow, I did it, like I got there, like, like, so like that, there's all these things that to tap into that can get you through the challenging moments that you might need to commit to just, but at the same time, I feel, I'm just going to say one more thing, and my mind's going a little bit like all over the place, maybe ADHD here coming in full effect. But what I want to say is that I found that doing things that seem monotonous, right? That if I look at them from different lenses, I can actually find like little kernels of energy that I can tap into, right? And I think a good example is actually in the book. I'll give you an example. So one of the people that I interviewed is Nelson Dellis, who's the 5 times US memory champion. And he talked about how when he was younger, he felt like he had a terrible memory. He couldn't remember anything, like it's just his experience in school. But his grandmother, I think it was, developed Alzheimer's, and he was like, okay, I have genetically that could happen to me, and I don't want that to happen. So he was motivated to start, improving his memory because he didn't want to lose it. And he took a deck of cards, and he's just started memorizing a few cards here and there, and eventually, he's just started getting better and better. But one of the things that really, he realized there were certain monotonous things about it, like that it can kind of hit these ceilings. And so what he would do is, let's say if he had like a deck of cards and he wanted to memorize it, and he was kind of doing it, but it took him like 10 minutes or, whatever it was early on, he would take a card out or add a card in, or he would change it up, right? So that it would create like a little micro challenge for him that, so it wasn't the same thing every time. He would change it up. And when he started changing it up, it was like infusing these little kernels of energy into the moment. And that allowed him to kind of keep going. And he got to the point where, he could memorize a deck of cards in like, I forget what what it was, but whatever the US memory champion does to get to, but it's like, well under like a minute. And he got so good that, he actually tried to climb Everest a couple times, and on his third attempt in the death zone, where there's,
Yep.
you can't survive because the oxygen level is so low, he was still able to memorize a deck of cards in under a minute. And but he got to the point where he recognized that he couldn't keep going, like because he was like cognitively, challenging himself during the hike. He had trained, he had already had 2 failed attempts, and he decided to turn back, and it was like, it was just such an incredible story because, it was almost like you could sense like the resistance and the ability to practice, someone to become a US memory champion, the amount of practice is insane that you'd have to do, but he found joy in practicing along the way. He was tapping into this awareness of and I just feel that applies to all of us. Like anything that we do, we can find little pockets of energy to tap into, but it just requires us to change things up, right? And to me, that's like the self-awareness piece that we're talking about. It's like, what can we change? And that the possibilities, I realize, are like infinite, like what we can change and how we can change it. And yet we tend to think of things linearly. We tend to think of things as, just sort of straight lines, and there's no other way to do it. But here's Nelson, who found a way to just mix his cards up or add cards in, or, and he just kept changing up his routine. And that allowed him to practice the number of hours he needed to become, one of the best in the world.
I don't want to miss that you a couple times talked about paying attention to that, like the burst of energy, the inspiration throughout the day. And then I appreciate you saying, and paying attention to the opposite of that, to the despair or the frustration or whatever, and go, why? And not just look at it, not judge it, probably look at it and go, this is probably important. Again, my muse for this, Jeff, is my kids. I've got a lot of kids, so I get to see that they're so different inherently. And they tend to go, oh, well, this kid is a rock star because he's killing it academically. And I don't have that. Well, yeah, but you've got something else over here. We always have, the strengths and the weaknesses, but to look at those and not judge them and to be curious about it. So I don't want people to miss that. It's a huge aspect for all of us to look at our makeup, not to judge it, and to be curious about it. Now, you said the word mind games. Let's play with that, because I struggle with the communication of that, because when I look at the 250 plus books on my shelf behind me of the amazing people like you I've had on the show, and here's your book, Lit. Use nature's playground to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. Now, in here, you didn't say, okay, folks, if you will take a scalpel and cut at this appropriate spot in your body and flip this switch, everything will be perfect, because there's not a tangible, at least in that way, switch. But you are saying, in a sense, there is one mentally. And we are back to mind games. And I feel like people can tend to struggle with that. And yet it's kind of what we're talking about, isn't it? It's a mind game. That's what we're doing. And if we'll look at it and accept it and say, okay, here I am. I have a lot of capacity, a lot of capability. I got to figure out how to ignite what I need to in me to get out XYZ results. It is a mind game. Is that too simplistic or unfair? Because I feel like it's just kind of what we're looking at overall.
Well, I think that a few things I think that are of note. One is that if we look to nature, right? So
Yep.
nature is a big theme in the
Yep.
book, has played a massive theme in my life. When I look at nature, I almost think like there's no end goal, right? There's no sort of here's where nature's trying to get to. It's actually quite the opposite. It's about evolution. It's about adaptation. It's about changes and perturbations, and and it's just adaptability and just keeps going. The life force just keeps going and going. But yet, here we are, humans, subjected to kind of this, education system that really just cubes, it flattens us, right? It really, the education system flattens us because it sets these very linear end goals. The end goal is to get an A in your courses, like it's like to get a whatever on your exam. It's very specific end goals. And I think that's a lot how we then approach life,
Can I ask, can I
yeah,
interject there, Jeff? Because I'm going to go
for
ahead
sure.
and put a big one in front of you. Because as you said, you just said nature doesn't have a goal. I would
An
agree
end
with that.
goal, an end goal.
An end goal.
Yeah, an end
Okay,
goal.
let's
Yeah.
go ahead and let's get big picture here for a minute then on that note, because I feel like it's very incredibly impacting to our lives to look at that and go, is nature neutral? Or is to exaggerate the point, the world's against me or the world's for me? We tend to see those polarizations. So here you are coming from an academic aspect, a scientific standpoint, talking about nature, and you're saying nature doesn't have an end goal. Thoughts on those perspectives, because those are biggies.
Yeah. Well, I think in nature what we see is that the environment is constantly changing, and the all of life has the different capacities to adapt to those changes. And
Mm-hmm.
some creatures can adapt and they survive, and some creatures are unable to adapt and they become extinct. Right. So something like 99% of all of life that has existed on the planet, all the species are extinct, right? And so it's like the 1% of all that has been here, but yet there's so much diversity currently in that 1%. And so, you could think of all the things that exist today, some of those, are a high percentage of them, like a million years from now, will be extinct, and there'll be all kinds of new things, right, that have
Which you could take
evolved,
to a nature's against me concept. Somebody could
right?
take it that way. Okay.
Well, you could take it as nature's against you, but I think it's actually quite opposite in the
Okay.
sense of when you look at what we all have within. So one of the things
Mm-hmm.
that we are all born with, and I really think is our evolutionary inheritance, is that we have the essence of evolution exists within all of us. We have the ability to evolve during our entire life, to be subjected to extreme changes in our environments, whether it's socially or at work or at home, personally, but this incredible ability to adapt. And one of the reasons is because we have this massive prefrontal cortex, this front part of our brain on a relative scale to the whole brain. That ratio, I think, is the greatest in the, of any species. And what that endows us with is this ability to think about thinking, to be able to plan, to be able to, look forward in time, to reflect backwards, to problem solve. And then the other thing that we have is this neuroplasticity, which is the
Yeah.
ability to rewire our brains. And so every experience we have, every thought we have, every emotion we have, is there's our neural connections are either being bolstered, new connections are forming, or we're pruning, getting rid of old connections is constantly happening. And if we sort of like, sometimes I feel like what we need to do is we need to step back from where we are in our moment and sort of have the intention of looking backwards in our life and looking at the situations we've encountered where we've been up against challenges, where we've had setbacks, where we've hit walls, encountered failures,
Yeah.
and look at what we did and where we are today. And I think that when we do that, we find that there's tons of examples that we can actually think of where we were able to, in the moment, it was very difficult. There was a lot of emotions and feeling, like you're really up against, things, how are things going to continue, blah, blah, blah. But then somehow we were able to, those emotions sort of subsided to a certain degree. And we were able to adapt, we were able to overcome, we were able to gain insights, we were able to grow from the experience. And so to me, we all have that. We all have these incredible prefrontal cortexes, and we all have this neuroplasticity that we can tap into, which is really the one of the key aspects of evolution and our evolution. And so I think there's a tendency to look at things from a negative perspective, but I think the reason that sometimes people go there is because this culture we exist in, it atomizes our attention, it cubes our time, and it flattens our imagination. We have there's $900 billion a year is spent on advertising to hijack our attention and tell us what's important, essentially to take us away from what our true values are, from what we feel is right or what we feel is important. That's being deflected. So we've been put into this fog, by modern culture. And so, of course, we tend to think in a negative sense. That's why I think a lot of, why we have such a high rate of depression and anxiety and stress and, all of these things. But there's the whole other side of it, like the yin and the yang or yang. There's this side where it's like, we can tap into this neuroplasticity. We can really leverage this incredible prefrontal cortex that we all have, this ability to learn and adapt and think about thinking and to create pauses between, the ultimate to me in intention. Like if we define what is intention, to me, the ultimate way that at least I define intention is where I have a thought in my mind that enters, and instead of reacting and saying something based on the thought, let's say I'm in a conversation, is I hold back and I just listen, right? Like instead of maybe interrupting, like let's say I find myself, I interrupt a lot and I say, no, I'm not, I have a thought. I know it seems really important. It's just, I have to say it. It's going to change the conversation. It's really important. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say, I just want to see where this goes. I'm just going to listen. And, and then at the end, if it was truly important, you'll find a way to bring it back up. And to me, that's intention. That's intention, is when you can actually slow down the process of things entering your mind and reacting to it either emotionally or, and even if sometimes I feel I get emotional, but that subsides, that doesn't stay. It never stays, everything, like there's this impermanence of everything. Every thought that ever enters your mind is going to exit your mind. Every emotion that you feel is going to leave. Like it's just how it is, like we're constantly changing. And so once you start tapping into that and then using that sort of like in your daily life, to me, that's the ultimate example of awareness and intention, where you can actually make decisions as you're engaging in people and, making decisions everywhere in your life, to not just act on your thoughts. We are not our thoughts, and I've been on that path, and I'm not fully there, but I'm on the path and I'm loving it.
You just described my technique right here. As you're talking and the thoughts are coming, I type them out. I'm the guy that if we're sitting there having coffee, I go, hold on, I'm with you. And I want to make a note because that was really good. And I make that note literally in my notes on my phone. And then by the time you're finished, then I can realize that wasn't that important, or it wasn't relevant, or, oh my gosh, that was killer. So, with this, again, the overall concept, and I'm going to read the book tagline again: use nature's playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. I mean, it feels like a message of hope. You're saying hope that we have neuroplasticity. We can we don't have to be stuck. We don't have to settle. We don't have to think we got the short end of the stick. We don't have to submit to whatever. We have a certain personality, style and makeup and experiences that have helped form us to where we are now. But this is nature and science and spirituality, that we do have neurologically with the ability to change and grow and expand. We have the ability, the possibility, the opportunity. And then again, I appreciate you saying life ignition tools. There are tools, and we have to employ those. That's just been heavy on me down some paths that I've been going recently, Jeff. Again, it's pithy to say, but it's easy to get knowledge. Everybody listening to this show right now is getting new knowledge, interesting knowledge. They're getting inspiration. Great. That is good. End of story. It will be much gooder if you make some notes. And then you take some actions and you change a habit and you employ something, that's the tenets of your books. Here are the tools. Here's how to engage with them. If you do that, well, I'm going to sum it up. There's hope for more. You are not stuck where you're stuck. And that's the good news of neuroplasticity. Fair enough?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one way to look at it is we were all born not speaking, right? We learned to speak,
Yeah.
like we tapped into neuroplasticity, right? We were all born not walking. We learned to walk. We tapped into neuroplasticity. We couldn't drive cars. We learned how to drive cars. You know what I mean? Like there's so many things, like we are constantly tapping into it. And I think the challenge of today is, if we, like, people say you are what you eat, but I think in many ways we are what we see, we are what we hear, we are what we experience, because everything we experience then rewires our brain. And so if we, for example, go on to Netflix and we just watch like action movies and things, I feel like we're preparing ourselves for something to happen. Like we're making ourselves more reactive, like our brains are being remodeled because of what we're consuming. And so that, to me, as I'm starting to kind of tap into that, I start to think, okay, like I gravitate towards watching action movies and, like all these kinds of things. But then I start to think to myself, okay, but what's the effect? And I find myself like, there's this domino effect that it creates, because and we don't recognize it, but I've started to recognize it because I'm really trying to. And I realize if I'm watching action movies, let's just say, then I have more tendency to drink coffee. I have more tendency to seek the dopamine. I have more tendency to put sweeteners in my coffee, to sort of go to those extremes, more tendency to put hot sauce on my food, to like, it's like it all connects. And when I start changing those patterns, everything starts to change. Like they're all interconnected. And so, I was the type of person who at one point, I was so disconnected, I'd be walking my dogs, watching Netflix for an hour, like around the neighborhood. And I would validate it to myself that, hey, the dog's got an hour walk and I was able to complete, an episode of whatever show, and I was like, and I got an hour of walking and look, I got great steps. And so I was like, win, win, win. But what I realized is that actually was causing other problems in my life. Like it was like all these things that I'm mentioning. And I was losing the opportunity to connect more deeply with everything. So now I'll just sort of take you to the extreme of what I do now. And it was a process for me to get there. So it was like a gradual process. But now I take the dogs out. My intention is not to be with, like, I don't say anything about technology because that never works. Like if I say I'm going to go for a walk and my intention is to not be on my phone, that does never work for me. But if I say my intention is to connect with my dogs during the whole walk, right? Then I can't be on my phone because my intention is to connect with the dogs, right? So it's like I can't do it. So what I do is I walk with them, I talk with them, right, as I'm walking with. And then what I notice is that they turn around and they look at me. So one dog, Ginger, turns around literally every 15, 20 seconds. We make eye contact and I feel a bond there. The other one, Ryder, every 2 or 3 minutes, he'll turn around and look. When we make eye contact, he has a burst of energy. He literally will start galloping a little, like just for a few steps forward when he sees me. And to me, that's like tapping into this energy transfer that we can all, we're all giving each other, we're all taking energy from people and giving energy to others. And so to me, it's like that. Then what am I cultivating? I'm rewiring my brain for connection, right? Like it's like complete, like, so here we have a certain amount of time. Do we want to wire our brains for, we have to be careful about what we consume, like what's in our environment, because that's going to rewire our brains. If we are hanging out with a bunch of friends who are into something that we don't want to be into, we're going to start being into that, because it's our brains are starting to be rewired that that's a normal, that's the new normal. And so now we're going to have to resist, like it's going to create inner tension and battles, and so versus if we hang out with people that have skills that we want and are that we want to aspire to, then that's going to rewire our brains for those patterns and those skills. And so, I just feel I've recognized how important it is. And that's what to me is the context of, like, again, people say like you want to sort of engineer your environment or somehow like shape your own environment, because that and again, it's kind of hard to like, okay, well, how do I do that? Like shape my environment. But to me, a good example has just been setting an intention of like connecting more deeply. Or I'll give you one other example. I walk around my neighborhood now and I cycle through my senses. So I'll look at, like, I'll say sight, and I'll look at the texture of the trees, and I'll look at the leaves and the colors, and and then I'll say hearing, and I'll just listen. I'll listen to the birds, and I'll listen to the wind rustling in the leaves or whatever. I'll say touch, and I'll sort of slow down. I'll feel my heels hit the ground and my toes and the clothing on me. I'll sort of feel that, and I feel the wind. And what that is doing is it's resensitizing my senses. Like, that's a goal. I want to resensitize my senses because our senses, the sensitivity of our senses defines our experiences, right?
Yeah.
So how we're experiencing the world. And the more sensitivity we have with our sight and our hearing and our touch, the deeper the experiences we're going to have around us. And so if I commit to resensitizing my senses, then I'm going to have more aliveness every day in everything I do. And my brain will be rewired to be able to tap into the nuances and really get at all of these things that can bring us awe.
The intentionality again. I appreciate it. And what you just spoke to, we've got, I had to look, it hasn't published yet, but got a guest coming up, Emily P. Freeman. She's a therapist, but she talks about, I think it's in a certain factory, or whatever, where it's something like point and call. And they just say everything that they're doing. Hey, I'm turning, or you can even do it in a restaurant, a busy restaurant, hey, heard that, corner. I mean, you're calling everything out to be intentional to this. I love that, to visual. I'm going to focus on the visual and to speak it out. I'm going to focus on the auditory and I'm going to speak it out. And how, man, I can be so mindless, Jeff, with my days. I can go along and not be aware at all. So in that light, and I'm not going to go through every single chapter, but I mean, you have, again, it's lit, life ignition tools. And that is what the chapters in the book go through. And to what you're just talking about, chapter 1 is flip the switch. What's holding you back? And it's intercept routine patterns to make simple, deliberate changes. Even that, just the intercepting routine patterns. I'll never forget a friend of mine years ago. She was going through therapy, and I think it was some OCD tendencies that they were dealing on. She lives in a suburb of LA, and the therapist told her, I want you to drive home from work a different way every day.
Yeah.
Which to me is, I mean, I sometimes do that anyways. I just choose to go that way. And why do you do that? It's not faster. I don't know, man. I just felt like it. I didn't feel like going. I don't know.
Great. I love
I do
that.
that. For her though,
Yeah.
I mean, it jacked her world. Like she has figured out so long to be comfortable with the exact way, the most efficient way, the comfortable way, the secure way. And for what she was dealing with, nothing wrong with that, no right or wrong, but with that, she needed to, where I could have somebody say, look, dude, you're so sporadic. I want you to go the same way every day. That would have been for me. So again, no judgment, no right or wrong, but looking at that again, chapter 1, intercepting the routine patterns to make simple, deliberate changes. I remember somebody one time said, man, if you want to make a change or you want to remember something, put it on a piece of paper, big bold typing, and put it in place of the primary clock in your kitchen or something like that, the place that you always are looking for the time. And it's so powerful just to do that, even for just basic awareness. And I've known people who have done it just to mix things up, just to kind of change things. And I realize the power of that because I so want to. I mean, we want to be efficient and we have a habit. It works. I don't want to have to think about it. Sometimes that's great. I don't really need to sit there and be thinking diligently about brushing my teeth. I'm okay letting that be kind of mindless.
Yeah.
But so tell us more about that, the intercepting routine patterns.
Yeah. So, well, I think one of the other tools that you're sort of getting at is called Do New, really, and it's about how when we do new things in our day, when we commit to doing new things, it literally lights up our brain. It helps us to break complacency. It helps us to bring in fresh energy, and to me, it's like deceptively simple, right? Deceptively simple. The fact that you can just take a different route to work and it can have this domino effect in your life.
Yeah.
And I've done things like this. And what I've realized is that if we take the same route to work, if we eat the same food, if we wear the same clothes, if we use the same toothpaste, if we, like there's all these things are the same, and we sort of step back, I sort of think, our brains love novelty. Our brains like eat it up. Our brains love it. And that's like a lot of where the advertising comes in and, all this kind of, sort of like hooking you in is to kind of these little pieces of novelty. It sucks you in, but we can, all these other things in our life, there's minimal novelty to them because we're just stuck in these patterns. And I think what happens is that nature is all about adaptation and changes. Again, like if you go outside and you take a picture of your lawn even, right? Or a tree or whatever it is, like some leaves, like throughout the day, they're going to be pointing in different directions. Like things are constantly changing. Nothing is staying the same, right? Nothing. But yet, if we start to get into these patterns, we start to dull our brains. They just like this repetition it's dulling because our brains are like, okay, I've seen this like 10 times. Maybe it's 50. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to shut off because I don't, there's no threats here. There's nothing going on here, nothing of interest. And so our brains just start to, go to this low energy brain state where our brains just anticipate what's going to happen next. There's nothing really exciting going on. And it just goes into this energy saver mode. Yeah. And that can have a domino effect in everything. So the simple act of changing our route to work or how we walk the dogs, or even, I'll give you another deceptively simple example. You mentioned brush your teeth. If you switch hands, right? Like say you always use your right hand and then you move to your left hand, right? Yeah. It's also a way to tap into your own neuroplasticity and have an awareness of it, because often what most people will find is that it takes like twice as long, maybe longer. It feels incredibly uncomfortable. You don't think you're doing as good a job, but if you stick with it for 5 days or 7 days, you start to get better at it. You start to go faster. You start to become more thorough. And then at some point you become just as good with your left hand as your right hand. Mm-hmm. Well, what's just happened? You've just rewired your brain, like this mind-body connection. You've just tapped into it. And when you make these small changes in our day, and it doesn't really require extra time, I mean, brushing your teeth is 30 seconds, whatever it is, it doesn't take much time to make these sort of like small changes. It literally has a domino effect in everything, and it opens your mind up to then be able to tap more into creativity and to connect more deeply and to have more awareness and to, it just leads to all these things, because then your brain's like, okay, what's next? What else am I going to change? And, you might be like preparing dinner and you're like, oh, I've been doing it the same way every time. But like, what if I'm just making this up, but like, you slice the tomatoes, and instead of just slicing them, each slice, you just take a look at it and notice the pattern, the pattern of what's there. One thing that I've done recently to break things up, I actually just got this like yesterday or the day before. I bought this, I don't have it with me if it's downstairs, bought this microscope that is like, it has a little screen on it, and you put it down on things. And so, I start putting it down on like a ladybug. We have this my wife and daughter claim that we have a ladybug infestation in my house, but there's a few here and there. So I don't know. They're like, bring in the Terminator. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, we can't. They deserve to live. But you put it down and it's like, oh my God. And then I put it on the back of the dogs, right? Like on their hair. And it's like, whoa, like what's that? And so, I gave it to my daughter last night. She didn't want to give it back to me. She just started putting it all over the place, looking at the patterns on her clothes and, her skin. And to me, that's like another way of like intercepting patterns. It's like
Yeah.
we can now, like, it's like, and that in particular, it's like accessing the fractals of life. Like, there's always like, I'll give you an example. Today, it was like raining, very blustery or whatever here in Boston. And, I look out and on the window, there's all the raindrops that are there. So I take this little microscope thing, I put it on the window and I'm looking at it, kind of focus in, I'm taking a look and I'm like, oh my God, like these are like the shapes of the clouds. Like, it's just like this sort of like, oh my God, look at all these shapes, like of all these water droplets. They're not all the same. They're completely different. So it's almost like you peel back the layer and you're like, whoa, like there's this whole other dimension that I never appreciated was there. And then it's like, you could keep going and going and going. And I think when we do these things, we intercept the patterns, we infuse the fresh energy into our lives, and we start to realize that this isn't about taking a microscope and going around. This is about everything in my life. This is about everything, it just filters through.
The analogy you used of doing something different. This last weekend was Easter as of our recording here, and with my family we went someplace else and we're playing cornhole. Most people know that.
Oh yeah,
You toss the
I love that game.
beanbag. Well, at some point I just had the idea. We'd played a few games and stuff, and I said, hey, let's all do it and use your non-dominant hand. And I thought it would just be hilarious, people throwing it all. Everybody was fairly good, or better than they thought, and kept getting better and better. And then as time went on, that's the only way they wanted to play.
Yeah.
I thought it was just going to be a funny fluke, and that's the way that they wanted to play. And something you said a minute ago that was significant to me last year. So I do a lot of outdoor adventure stuff. I'm an elite level mountain biker, and do trail running, and we do kayaking and a lot of things. And I went with some guys surfing. We went to Mexico and went surfing. And I'm not a real big water guy, never surfed. And I was terrible. We did it twice. I hardly even got up. I got beat to heck. I got sore. I got chafed. I got whatever. And yet afterwards, instead of feeling, worse about myself, I kind of felt better. I kind of felt more confident because I realized, well, I didn't die. I was able to, get out there and have fun. I tried something and I made it, and I can kind of see what it would be like. I kind of want to do it again and try to, and it raised my confidence. And yet I had been kind of staying over here in what I do well.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, it was afterwards, and I realized I think I had kind of gotten a little holding on tight to it. Like, I'm going to do the things that I do well, that feed my ego, that I feel confident in. I didn't even know it until I went and did something I sucked at. And so the next thing, we did stand up paddleboarding. I'd never done that. I did that as well. And again, it was really interesting. And I realized, for me, Jeff, I realized how much I was holding on to what was comfortable and secure. And I have cited that no, I'm good with that. I'm willing to tackle anything, try something new. I'm confident. Realize now I really wasn't. And breaking out of that was really cool. So again, just to testify to, we kind of combined, I know it's chapter 1 of flip the switch, intercept routine patterns. And it was chapter 8, do something new, do something different. And again, these are what you're calling ignition tools to get us, would you say it to get more out of us? There's more in there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think we are only using a tiny fraction of our machinery, like what we have access to. And again, I feel like there's this sort of complacency, this like, getting into a rut, just repeating patterns. And our culture is really cultivating us to do that. Our culture is with especially like all the marketing efforts. And then I think the other part of it is, 10, 15,000 years ago or so, when we were all hunter gatherers, there's sort of like the sort of evolutionary basis for us to be in this low energy brain state and to not engage in new things, because we were supposed to be conserving energy back then. Like it was like we exert energy for survival. We were doing things during the day that would keep us in great shape. We're always working hard, but otherwise we're conserving our energy for, going on the hunt or running away from something or having to move miles and miles away to an area with more resources, right? We just had to conserve. So even like exercise back then wouldn't have make no sense whatsoever. To exercise, to exert your energy to do something that doesn't involve survival. It was all about survival. But that stays with us today. And that makes us be fearful and hesitant to do new things. Like it's like built in. So like it makes sense that we don't, it's not, I think we still have to stop shaming ourselves for not, getting off the couch and doing something, because there is an evolutionary basis for it, right? That sort of like energy saver mode. But when you start to realize kind of what you're up against, that there's this culture that is sort of trying to keep us there, right? And keep us like in front of our screens all day long. And then there's this evolutionary basis to be in this energy saver mode. You're like, wow, I'm really up against a lot. I really do need tools. I really do need, sort of bursts of inspiration from others. And I really do need to kind of try to hang around people who are doing things that I really want to do, because if you're on the couch and you're hanging out with other people who like to hang on the couch, it's going to be even that much harder, right, to get off of it. But if you surround yourself with people who are elite athletes, right, or people who are really into, you're going to start to, like, oh, you become curious about it, and it becomes a desire, and it starts to, the conversations and the wiring of the brain, and so to me it's I think by knowing what we're up against, but also knowing what we have within this incredible machinery. And I think you highlight a really important point, which is we throughout our lives can constantly engage in things that we initially suck at and are just, terrible at. But we can get into these situations where we create the right environment where we can incrementally improve. And that becomes, that just is so energizing, right? To do something you've never done before. It could even be like play a board game, or some sort of card game or something you've never played before. And initially it's like, I hate this, like, what are the rules? You can't remember it. You kind of get into this shaming thing. But like, if you keep at it, like 5, 6, 7 hands later, you start to get it. And then you start to get the strategy. And then all of a sudden, you start to tap into, wow, I just learned this. Like, like you come a long way in a short period of time. And you may never get to be like the elite athlete, but all of us can get on the path to improving a skill, any skill possible. It's just, you just need to engage the right process that works for you.
Well, and back to again, you have me continually focused on the intentionality. When I have something I'm thinking on, I'm trying to come up with an idea, or I'm trying to really go deep with something, and I'm going to go exercise, and I want to focus on the thing, I'm going to go do a route that I know like the back of my hand. I don't have to think about it. I can just do the ride or the run or whatever mindlessly. On the other hand, if I'm intentional and thinking, okay, I don't really want to think about any specific thought. I really want to just kind of empty my mind and go ride someplace new, someplace technical, someplace that's going to make me stay there. So again, back to the intentionality of that. And I really appreciate you, because I resonate with knowing what you're up against. I like that concept of, let's just get the cards on the table. Let's know what's going on here. And even that, you saying, is interesting, saying that evolutionarily, we want to conserve energy. And so back in the day, to pick on that idea, I get up in the morning and I got to go out and kill something and drag it home so we can eat. So I'm going to go out and literally run, throw a spear, yank something back, whatever. Today, I go out and my mind feels that when I come here and sit in my desk, sit on my butt with my heart rate at, 60, and I do that and we do a show and it's great. And I did my work. I killed something, drag it home. Now I'm not naturally inclined to go out and make some big effort. And yet I have to realize, but I didn't drag something home and carry something, and I didn't move at all. I've been completely sedentary, and it feels like an extra effort. Like I have to put extra focus to go out in there and artificially exercise, artificially move my body. That's just the reality that we live in. We don't have to move anymore to exist and survive. So we have to artificially go do that for the most part. I like getting the cards out on the table. So with that said, you got 2 points I want to hit on here. And you mentioned a second ago, low energy brain, LEB, the natural inclination to conserve energy and resist change. Unpack that more as far as getting the cards on the table. This is a reality of who we are that we've got to be intentional to get around.
Yeah. So the low energy brain state is just, it's something I refer to because that's how I feel. Like, and I've just, through sort of various experiences, I felt myself gravitate to this state where, exactly as you described, like I feel lethargic. I feel like I just want to stay put. I feel like everything is so far out of reach, or I just don't have the energy to do anything. There's been these studies that have been done. I think there was even a study by, it was like a Navy SEAL study or some elite group in the Army where, they sort of push soldiers to a certain point, and then they ask them, okay, how much reserve do you think you have left? And they said, like 10% or whatever. And then they realized that it was like, 50%, like they could actually go. And so it's like this sense of like, we have this misperception of the amount of energy we have within us to actually act, right? But yet, so so these two things, right? So we kind of get into this low energy brain state where our brains anticipate what comes next. We're in this, it's like energy saver mode. Everything's on autopilot. We're doing, and in those modes, we actually are being hijacked by marketing and advertising and algorithms. And so it's so easy for flame throwing tweets and headlines and things. It just captures our attention. It's just like the candy, right? That I consider as low energy, sort of low activation energy. So there's actually two concepts that are really critical to, I don't know, how I've been trying to, process the world. So one is this low energy brain state. So it's kind of what we gravitate towards, where we're just in the science world. That's where I do just incremental work. I'm not really sort of doing anything great. I'm just sort of coasting along. And I see something and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll do that next. Oh, that's interesting. But I don't really have this like strategy to maximize impact or to have
I
like
want to speak to that because in talking about it, so LEB, low energy brain, it just I guess confirmed what I've experienced is even when I have something that I'm excited about, I'm inspired to do it. I want to write the book, over my other shoulder, here's my book. And I realized I want to, I want to get the message. I care about it. It's valuable to me. I even enjoy the writing process. And then the day goes by and I didn't do any. And I'm looking and going, what is wrong with me? This is great stuff. Well, it still takes effort. I still have to focus, and that takes more energy. And so you saying, okay, yeah, you're normal. That's humanity. You're human, and you're going to by proxy go into this low energy brain. Okay, it gives me some compassion for myself and at least go, okay, that makes sense now. Okay, but I'm going to overcome that and go. So yeah, keep going.
So to overcome it, that's where I think of the activation energy. So this is something that I learned about when I was younger. One of the classes, it was like a chemistry or physics class where, kind of talking about the way that was kind of described is like, let's say there's like a glass beaker, right? And you have like two molecules in the beaker, and they're different, but they're just kind of moving around. And then you add some heat to it and they move around a little bit more. You add more heat and they move around more. Nothing's really happening. Then you add a little more heat and then all of a sudden they bombard and they connect and a chemical reaction occurs. That's the activation energy, the amount of energy you needed to put into a system for something to happen, right? In this case, a chemical reaction to create a new molecule. And so when I learned that, I was like, oh, that's so interesting, because I feel I can apply that to like every area of my life, any skill I want to do, or what we're talking about here. So it's sort of like, okay, well, what's a low energy activation thing? It could be, let's say I have a chocolate bar, you know, in my fridge, and I see the chocolate bar there, and I'm like, and I just eating that. That's low energy. Like, it takes almost zero energy because I feel like a craving for it, right? So I'm going to eat it.
Right.
What's high activation energy? Maybe, let's say, if I want to get on my bike, but I haven't ridden my bike for 2 years, and I'm like, I want to ride my bike today. The amount of energy to do that, or if I'm like, oh, I haven't been to the gym in months, I'm going to go today. Like, or if you're like, how am I going to get to go? Like, it's like, what's the energy you're going to need to put into something that you haven't done in a while, that might involve multiple steps? Maybe you have to apply for a membership, and you have to and you're just like, oh, there's too many, that's a higher activation energy that's required to put into something. And to me, it's been just a useful way to break things down, to reduce the activation energy so that I can actually get the ball rolling. So for example, actually a bike example. So my friend Michael Gale, last summer, he called me while he was on his bike, and he said being on his bike is his happy place. And immediately I connected, and I was like, yeah, me too. Like, I've always had good, like, being on a bike, it's like you're a bird, like you're just, it just feels amazing. Right. And then I was like, well, why am I not riding? And here we are kind of getting into the summer. And so I thought, okay, I know if I tried to go ride my bike that day, it probably is not going to happen because I didn't have air in my tires. The bike was dirty. I didn't even know if it was safe. And, I didn't even know where my helmet was. Like, it was kind of like, there was a lot of moving pieces. So I said to myself, okay, what I'm going to do is each day I'm going to do one thing. And I feel like the pressure will build up and I will be able to go. So first day I put air in the tires. Next day, and I only let myself do like one thing at a time, right? Like, I don't even let myself progress. So then the next day I clean up the bike. Next day I put the bike, right beside the car. So I'm going to see it every single day. I'm going to walk by the bike. And then the next day I hang my helmet on the side of it. So there is nothing I need to do other than find 15 minutes to get on the bike and go for a ride around my neighborhood. Like, that's it. So I've reduced the activation energy such to the point is all I need is 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, but like just to go around the neighborhood. And last summer I biked over 1,000 miles. I mean, I know to you it's probably not that much, but for me, for someone who hasn't been biking, it was like, I was biking almost every day.
I love the analogy of just making it, well, you call it lowering the activation, knowing that looking at that task is going to be kind of overwhelming. It's interesting. I do it. In the winter, I live up in the mountains of Colorado, and it's cold and it's often snowy, and then the snow melts and it's muddy and whatever. And so it has become a lowering activation exercise that I just don't ride, I run. So I think about it, and I think, because my go-to is riding, but I think about, oh man, the effort to do that, to get all the right clothes on, to be warm enough, and to deal with the air pressure for whatever the conditions are like out there. The thought of just running seems so easy. Dude, just throw some clothes on. You're going to get warm running, and some shoes, and go out the door. And it's a lower activation aspect that helps me get out the door, and I wouldn't otherwise with the bike. But yeah, looking at that, I love your analogy of doing what you can to realize that just activating and getting it out the door, doing that thing can seem overwhelming. If we can take some of those steps away and do them ahead of time, do something, get your stuff ready, get your workout stuff ready in the morning, and give yourself. I have a friend who said it helps him to give himself permission to quit or not do it, and say, you know what? I may not go out today riding, but I'm at least get the bike ready. And then if I do it in a week or whatever, well, then later in the day, well, it's already ready now, or the next morning. It's just great. Again, it's mind games.
Yeah. And I mean, this can apply to every area of our life as well. I mean, it could be learning a new language, or developing some sort of a skill or sport, or, whatever it is. We can, if we just sort of step back. And to me, what I've recognized through my life is that I need to reframe things constantly in order to do the things I really want to do.
Yes.
And so to me, like, I know people will say, okay, break things up into steps. And, that was good for me for a while, but like, I feel the activation energy is just a whole new way of thinking about it, and again, that's a little way of sort of tricking our minds, and our minds like novelty. And so I've realized, actually, as a tool in my life that I need to embrace, I need a reframe of things constantly. I need to have a different way. Like, and then the other thing I also notice is that any sort of rituals or patterns or practices that I have in my life, that at some point the practice gets in the way of what I really want to do. Like if I want to, let's say I want to exercise to have these positive neurotransmitters, flow through my brain just
Yeah.
because I feel good, after I exercise. And I set the commitment that I'm just going to ride my bike every day and I'm going to sort of find a way to do it. But sometimes I might not want to ride my bike. I may actually want to try something else. I might want to go play tennis, or I might want to, there might be something else that getting on the bike gets in the way of, right? And so I let myself sort of get on the bike and I, will love it. I'll get into it. And then eventually there'll be some moments where I'm like, I hesitate to get on the bike. Like there's some change. I notice some changes, that's sort of happening. And I'm like, okay, I could try to stick to my routine. But what I've noticed is that sometimes I purposely don't stick to a routine because something else comes in, like there's some other activity that presents itself. Like,
Well, I got a question for you on that.
yeah.
Because I grapple with it a little bit. I mean, again, I was a pro athlete, so there were a lot of days where it doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter if you don't feel up to it. It doesn't matter if it's raining outside. It doesn't matter whatever. I was a pro cyclist. You're going to go out and train. So I did that year in and year out. I know I can do that. So I say that as a preface to I grapple a little bit with the fitness jargon out there that goes, hey, the most important day is the day you don't want to do it and you do it. Maybe so. Maybe so. For me, I've shown that I can do that. And if I go out and I'm bitter about it, I don't know that it's actually better for me. And I've gotten to the point now of going, if I feel it, if I'm feeling it, I'll go out and I'll kill it. If I'm not, I do know it's good to go move my body, but I may just go for a walk. Or I may go for a jog and not commit to, I have to run the whole time. And if I feel like walking, I'll walk. Or I may go do, I could go skip rope, or I've got a punching bag out there and go, what feels better? And so I grapple somewhat with it. Is it better to just, never quit? I don't want to pick on somebody. I was going to say David Goggins, but you do it no matter what. Okay, maybe. But if you're doing it out there bitter, I sometimes question it. Maybe you could do something
Yeah.
that's a little low key and pay attention to where you're at. Thoughts?
Well, my intention, because I'm not like training for anything in particular,
Sure.
right? So I think there is a bit of a difference there, but because I'm not training for anything, my intention is when I engage, let's say in exercise, I want to enjoy it. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I'm on my bike and I'm really enjoying it, but then at some point it gets like, I've repeated the pattern too much, right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason,
Yeah.
and I'm not enjoying it as much, then I sort of, found a way to kind of give myself permission to say, okay, well, maybe what I could do is instead of going for, trying to get 10,000 steps in a day, I'm going to try to get 15,000, and I'm going to go to, walk the dogs through, like, it's going to be a hike, like, up terrain and so, and I'm like, okay, I like that because it's new. Again, I feel like our brains, our brains love novelty. And so, if we're training, so I think it's a different situation. Let's say if we're an elite athlete and we're training for something, then
Sure.
I think that maybe like, my approach, I'm just sort of thinking about it, would be how can I change things up so that like maybe the goal is I want to maintain where I'm at, but I want to get a little better, every day or every week or whatever. And I'd be like, okay, but maybe that gets too monotonous. So it's like, okay, what could I do? Like maybe on the bike, as you were saying, maybe I start asking my friends who are elite athletes in the area who are bikers and say like, what are the routes that you really love doing? And then you can just start going and doing new routes,
Yeah.
right? So you can change it up and sort of like, so I think there's ways to constantly change it up if you're doing this, if you need to do the same thing because that's your intention, or to kind of give yourself permission to just stop doing that one thing. Because I've kind of felt this shame. I would shame myself sometimes and be like, like, I've got on the bike, I've been doing it every day, but now I don't feel like it. Like, why don't I feel like it? What's wrong? But I just feel like could just be like the novelty thing. I just need to change. I just need to do something else.
Okay, so I want to ask about that. Which interestingly on the workout stuff. So I mean, doing something fitness wise is something that I do consistently and I enjoy that. But I have gotten to where I allow myself cycles. If I don't feel like riding today, I honor that and go run. And if I don't feel like doing that, maybe I'll row. Maybe I'll do something, let yourself do that instead of feeling like you got to stick to it. So I do enjoy that. But you said a bunch. Our brains like novelty. Our minds like novelty. And I've been wanting to ask you to unpack that a little bit because there's going to be some folks out there who may question it and feel like, no, I don't like change. I like things consistent. I like them to stay the same. Or I don't, anything, if something change, I feel insecure. I want things comfortable and consistent and whatnot. And they're hearing you say our brains love novelty and they're questioning it. So unpack that with that in mind.
Well, I think that I think it kind of comes back to our capacity, right?
Okay.
And the machinery that we have. So I think we're all endowed with this machinery. And we talked about some of these elements before that enable us to learn new skills and that enable us to embrace novelty and new experiences constantly, right? There certainly is a comfort to sort of working your way through something and getting to a plateau and being okay, like feeling like you're fine, like you don't need
Yeah.
to keep growing in something, or you don't need to keep progressing and challenging yourself. And my sense is like it all kind of comes down to the intention. So if you feel great about where you're at and you feel this deep sense of wellness, and you don't feel like there's anything missing, you don't feel like, maybe your relationships are all great, and you feel connected to people, and you feel like your work is going well, and you feel this just general sense of wellness and everything, then you might be somebody who it's totally fine where you're at.
Fair.
In my experience, I find that I do need novelty. When I do new things, it brings in this, it electrifies me. Like I feel amazing. And I've done this in my lab where, we're constantly getting into new areas. Like we work in the area of type 2 diabetes and
Mm.
arthritis and cancer, and developing needles that can automatically stop in different layers of the body, and tissue glues that work inside beating hearts. And we're just constantly like our osteoarthritis and inflammatory bowel disease, and we were targeting the brain with certain nanoparticle technology. And I just love it. I just feel like exhilarated, and it's hard, and I'm always asking questions, and I'm like, oh, like I'm vulnerable, I'm in this state. But I've just found, for me personally, that's how I thrive at this moment in time. But I can totally appreciate that some people are just super content where they're at, and they everything's great for them, and they feel wonderful. I think there's a lot of people who are questioning right now, like saying like something, they can't place it, they can't put their finger on it. There's something seems wrong, there seems like a disconnect, there seems
Yeah.
like there's a better way of being, a different way of being. There's some sort of like they don't feel as well as they could feel. They don't feel like they're bringing value to society in the way that they really feel they could, or they can, or there's disconnects. And to me, when you feel those disconnects, that's where I think a lot of these things start to come in, like being able to tap into this incredible machinery that we have, and this our neuroplasticity, and really leverage this incredible parts of our brain, and the connectedness of our brain, and our ability to also connect with nature and really
Hmm.
feel that embrace. Because when we're on a path towards deeply connecting with nature, we're developing this interconnected mindset. And I don't know, I can't tell you like how many times I've been in conversations where I come away from them and I'm just like, I just feel like, oh, why did I say that? Or like, it just didn't feel right. Like I didn't feel connected to the person that I met. And I sort of was like, and it was almost like maybe I didn't have enough sort of gratitude for that person. Like I didn't, and so I've kind of been on this path to deepen my ability to connect with people. Like now when I meet with people, I'll say to myself before I meet, I'll say, this is the most important person in their lives, like this is like, because if I don't say that, what happens is the energy of whatever I'm doing before I meet this person, I'm going to bring it. So like if I'm heads down and I'm trying to hit a deadline, I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then all of a sudden I look up, it's like, oh, I have a meeting in a minute. And I'm like, close my laptop and I start meeting. I'm bringing that energy to the meeting, and then that filters through everyone they talk to from their day, like it creates this cascade. And so I feel I need to constantly intercept patterns in my own life in order to be intentional, so that when I engage other people, like, when I'm having conversations with people at work and my family, that I come away feeling like I really, like, it just feels natural and it flowed and I feel connected, and I've been able to get there. It's and I think through all of these things we're talking about, I've been able to develop the deeper awareness and be able to create pauses, and so, so to me it just depends on people reflecting on, are they good, and is there really nothing missing, and if not, that's amazing, that's a great place to be. But if you feel like there's a disconnect, I just think there's so many things we can do to energize our bodies and our brains. And when you start to kind of tap into that and become more intentional, it's just so empowering. It's so self-empowering for me to be in a conversation with somebody, as I was saying before, and I'm like, oh, I gotta say this, and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna say it. That, I'm like, wow, like it just, like, like that sense of my children are speaking and I'm like, I feel the urge to talk, but I know from previous experience, if I say something, they'll stop speaking, they're gonna stop saying whatever they're saying. And I'm like, no, Jeff, don't say it. Don't say it. Just no, don't say it. It's gonna pass, gonna pass. And then it passes. And I'm like, win, that's a win, like I say that to myself, like that's a win, that's huge, and I just feel, for me, I just constantly need to engage in practices and sort of have this sense of what feelings I have from things, because I don't know, there's this dynamic nature of who I am and what I do and how I engage in the world, and I need these checks and balances to help me navigate.
That's how I experienced your book, Jeff, was kind of like an audit, to go, well, I can say the same thing about my book. I go through these 7 key areas of life to ask. It's actually to chapter 3 of your book. Get bothered, wake up to what you want, identify the why that motivates you. That's the culmination of my book. What do you want, and understanding why, coming into alignment, what drives you. And I actually wanted to put this in my book, and my publisher didn't like it, but I was saying, look, if you look through these and feel like you're good in all these areas, but one, just go read that chapter and forget the rest. They didn't like that. I think we worded it differently. But to that degree, I feel like that's fair. And in your book, I felt like it was an audit to go down through I think it's 13 chapters, and look at it. And if, like that, number 1, flip the switch, intercept routine patterns. And I think, I kind of feel like I do that already. Okay, go to the next one. And I get there, and then, in chapter 5, pinch your brain. Attention is your superpower. Interrupt, mind drift, and the pull of distractions and intentional tugs. Okay, I need some work on that one. So it gave me kind of an audit and go, which tools do I need? I like the concept of tools, because for any specific problem, I don't know if I need a hammer or a wrench or a screwdriver or a drill or whatever. And that's what this offered in the book, was the ability to kind of go through. And as you said, if you're good, then skip it, go to the next one. Where are you? I don't want to say having a problem, but where do you desire more? Fair enough?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And it totally resonates with me as well, like kind of going back to what I was saying, like how I learned by looking at the problems and then figuring out what I needed to learn to understand, like the solutions, like I would look at the solution to a math problem and I'd be like, okay, I don't understand this. So now I know exactly what I need to learn to understand that. And so it's almost like I only was learning what I needed to learn, and everything else I didn't need to learn to do that problem, like forget it. And so, and I would say, you talked about pinch your brain, attention is your superpower. I just feel like we so underrate our how important our attention is, and then even beyond that, how much capacity we have to direct our attention. I think it's I'll give you an example, and we talked a little bit about this before, but let's say if I set an intention when I'm eating a meal, right? Like we tend to just eat and we get to the end and we don't even remember any flavors, right? Or we have
Right.
like we're even engaging in a conversation when we're eating. Like I feel sometimes I just don't even want to. I want to just tap into the food, like I just want to sort of connect with it. And so if my intention is I want to experience every flavor of what I'm eating, right? And I'm talking to somebody, I'm not going to do as good a job at that, right? Like because I'm distracted. Or if I'm watching some Netflix show or scrolling or whatever, I'm not going to tap in. So if I set the intention, I want to focus my attention on the flavors,
Yeah.
and I'm actually zoned in on that, I will have a completely different experience of eating my meal than if I was in a conversation or watching or scrolling, like it completely changes the experience. And by the way, if I do that a few times in a row, 5 times or 10 times, I will continue to evolve my ability to connect with the flavors and discern the flavors. And, like it develops this sort of this habit, this pattern of tapping into the sensitivity of taste.
Yeah.
Um, and and so to me, that's like one way that we can wield our power of attention. Um, Another thing that I do, just for you mentioned sort of distractions. One thing that I came up with, and I don't think this is in the book, but what I do is I write down on a piece of paper the word distraction, right? And I put like a box around it. And then as I'm working and doing whatever, anytime I feel the urge to be distracted, or I catch myself in a distraction, right? Like I'm all of a sudden on Instagram just scrolling. I turn to the page beside me and I put a check mark
Hmm.
right in the box,
Yeah.
right? And I call this the distraction disruptor. And it's like, again, deceptively simple. But what it does is it intercepts the pattern, which is really what lit is all about. It's intercepting these routine patterns to actively think and decide versus just jump in with habitual responses. And I've noticed that I can get this habitual response of being distracted all day long. But if I put the check mark in the box, it
Yeah.
sort of like centers me. It brings me back. It's almost like meditation in a way, like where
Yeah.
people who meditate, you sort of come back to your breath, right? Your mind's going all over and you're like, okay, we're going to bring it back to the breath. So here I'm sort of bringing it with the check marks. I'm sort of bringing it back to the task on hand and like, okay, I'm in a distraction. And often it dissipates when I do the check mark. And it also can be like a biomarker. What I mean by that is like if I don't get a lot of sleep, or if I have a lot of caffeine, or I eat a lot of carbs and I like crash afterwards, I become more distracted. I find more check marks, in the for the distraction disruptor. So there's so many of these simple tools that we can
Yeah.
engage when we're distracted. Another thing I do is I take my phone and I put on the stopwatch. I just hit go and I have it there. And I'm like, okay, how long can I go without being distracted? A little challenge, right? And
Yeah.
so I feel the urge to go to Instagram or YouTube or whatever it is. And I'll look at the time and I'll be like, okay, can I go another 20 seconds without going there? Right. And then, okay, can I go another 20 seconds? And, it becomes a challenge. And it's amazing because when I do it, and I'm actually able to go another minute or two or whatever it is, that feels good, right? Like that was an
Yeah.
act of intention. I set this up, it's self-empowering, and it actually reduces my distractibility by being able to do these things. There's also this app that I've used called Flora. And it's my sister's a child psychologist in Ottawa, and she told me about it because she recommends it to her patients. And I was like, all right, check it out. And it's like like a plant or something that you're growing. And you set the timer at like 25 minutes. But if you use your phone to do something like, scroll or whatever it is, then the plant dies. And so you kind of have, yeah.
Wow.
So it sort of helps you tap into,
Okay. Hold on. I want to check it. Flora is what it's
yeah,
called.
yeah.
That's
Flora.
hilarious.
Yeah, yeah.
And it reminds me, as is years ago, I had we had a new nutritional. My studio's in a functional medicine practice with my best buddy, and so nutritional supplements, we do a lot of stuff with that. And there is one that we use. It's called Veracid, actually. And if you feel like a little sickness is coming upon you, you take one and
Yeah.
try to ward it off. And you take one every hour. So I set my watch to give me a chime, or my phone, whatever it was, to every hour. And what dawned on me is, holy crap, how fast the hour goes by. And I'm thinking, what did I do it's already been an hour. What was I scrolling social media? Was I just answering emails? Can I account for anything of value? And it just made me so aware. So I started doing that practice every once in a while. I can't do it consistently because it kind of gives me anxiety as well, like thinking about
Same.
it. But just the concept of being intentional and aware of the time. But Flora, I gotta check that out. I mean, you talking about attention, I want to call back to what you said earlier in our talk, that there was, it's a $90 billion, whatever you said, or 900 billion,
900
900 billion
billion.
to get our attention. That's another thing to get on the board there, to realize that we all have these devices and computers vying to get our attention. So, and yeah, that I was referencing chapter 5, which is called, pinch your brain. Well, again, man, I appreciate you coming from personal development standpoint and nature standpoint, and using these tools. That these are things that we can use, that left, again, on the aspect of getting stuff on the table, left to our own devices, to use that term, man, we get stuck and we don't see options. And I love the way that you came at this. These are tools that you can use depending on where you want to grow, progress, change, have more success, and employ these. Again, I'm going to use the word mind games, like you talked about earlier. In essence, that's what we've got to do. Otherwise, we just stay in the current state that we are. So if we want to be intentional, and I feel like that's one of the primary tools that I got out of your message in your book, is just, am I looking at my day? Am I looking at the next hour? Am I looking at this issue? And am I being intentional? Which, again, back to your superpower, the fact that you were 8 years old and started thinking about what you're thinking about, may be the biggest takeaway that we can have from this. Man, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate you being here and putting this book out. I'm eager to send it out to everybody and have folks tune into this. Obviously the book is lit. Use Nature's Playbook to Energize Your Brain, Spark Ideas, and Ignite Action, by Jeff Karp. Any other place that you would have people specifically connect with you outside of the book?
Sure. I just put a website together. It's just my name, jeffkarp.com, Karp with a K. And there people can find, links to get the book. There's also content there that is not in the book that you can gain access to. And there's links to my lab and some of the technologies that we're developing. For example, this tissue glue that seals holes inside a beating heart and blood vessels. It's being explored now for nerve reconstruction in a clinical trial, and for hernia repair. So you can learn more about that and the bioinspiration angle behind that, as well as we've developed all kinds of ways of delivering drugs to different parts of the body, that, joints for arthritis, and the brain for neurological conditions, and needles that automatically stop when they get to the right sites of the body. We developed a nasal spray in the lab that we showed could kill all kinds of airborne pathogens, bacteria, and viruses. We just launched that onto the market in October, and yeah, all kinds of things there. And I'm also including on the site, and I'm just in the process actually putting this up there, is, because my mom has just been so just a source of just true hero, and mentor and guide and cheerleader in my life. She's been writing a lot of poetry over the last number of months, and so I'm gonna have a little section on my site for my mom to post her poetry. So she just picked the poem that she wants to put up there first, so you'll be able to find that there as well.
That's awesome, man. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I on that note of some of the stuff you just talked about, we didn't even get into that. I mean, you are, an inventor, you've got a zillion patents, and an innovator. So reading the book, you're going to get, folks, you're going to let you get a lot of stories, a lot of intriguing just stories of the things that you're involved with. And then, as you said, on your site as well, man, it's inspiring Jeff, I'm inspired. I think I want to hold that out for you, folks. You want hope and inspiration, and then tangible tools to utilize. That's what the book's about. That's what Jeff's about. And it's been a gift. Thank you for being here, for doing what you're doing and taking the effort to bring it to us and out of your lab. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Likewise. Well, again, friends, that is Jeff Karp, Dr. Jeff Karp. And the book is LIT, L-I-T, which stands for Life Ignition Tools. Tagline is Use Nature's Playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. You can also find him at Jeff Karp, KARP.com. Well, hey, thank you for joining me on this journey, in this conversation. I hope sincerely that this episode helps you drive further and enjoy the ride. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. I look forward to meeting you in the Drive Tribe community for ongoing discussions about each episode. You can subscribe to the Drive Drop newsletter for weekly updates. Find it all at kevinmiller.co, along with all our social media and video clips. Until next time, I hope this episode helps you drive further and enjoy the ride.